So, good morning, you guys. I want to talk about the Lil Tay controversy. Lil Tay is a social media influencer, and she's also a rapper, and she's done a series of controversial videos throughout the years. And most of the big controversy about her is that she's just trying to be like this rapper, and then she's also like comes off as like this entitled millennial, like, and really into the gangster rap culture, like a bragging, using the N word, and just throwing money around, acting like a big deal, and other things like that. And then there's some people who will say, again, this she's trying to be like Seymour from the Boondocks, or she's trying to like just being a poser because usually like there's scenes of her being coached by her brother, or whatever. So it does feel very fake, or it feels like she's not really into this. So it is called being a poser when you're doing something and you want to act like you're in that culture or in that toughness, and you're actually not really. And then there's also that other argument of again, if she wants to pursue like rap culture and being a social media influencer and just being unapologetic, you you have the right to do that. There's freedom of speech, and whether people like it or not like it, fuck you, it's her life really. And then the other thing too is that I'll say this that in the 1990s there was Bart Simpson and Eric Cartman, and there was Dennis the Menace, there was Huckleberry Finn. Throughout human history, there's always been a person or a fictional character that's adolescent, that's been around a controversy, like the character in Catcher for the Rye, really. So that's always been every single lifetime generation. And then the other thing about it is like I said, if you have an issue with her, why don't you have an issue with Eric Cartman? Why don't you have an issue with Bart Simpson? Why don't you have an issue with Catcher in the Rye? Some people did really. So you can't really hold her to a high standard because nowadays the biggest shock really is children acting really defiant and everything like that really. And unfortunately it is an industry because here I'm making a video, I may get 1,000 subscribers. There are people all over the internet talking about this, and they have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, million subscribers really. So it is an industry of of talking about profiting, doing side marketing of somebody's controversy. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys and say that's what it is really. I tend to like controversial subject matter, and that's why I'm here. So the big controversy about her is that she's doing an OnlyFans page, and she was talking about how on her 18th birthday at 12:01 a.m. she's going to drop a link, and there are a bunch of problems with this. Like, first of all, she's talking about this days before her 18th birthday on Instagram and other platforms, so it's a little concerning that you're seeing this girl who's 17, still a minor, in many places. There are some places, I think it's like 14, 16 in the United States, you are considered where you may not be considered, you're considered an adult in some places at 14 or 16 years old. So obviously, you still have someone who's under 18 years old, maybe still in high school, maybe a minor in some states, promoting a adult channel where that pictures. That's one thing. The next thing about it is that if she's uploading pictures and saying, my OnlyFans starts at 12:01 a.m., I'm gonna drop the first new photos, as everybody says. Really, how does she have the time within that 1 minute time frame to post photos? It has to be when she was 17 years old, really. And then also the sick part about it is that her brother does a lot of her video stuff. Her mom gets all these locations, so you got to ask her yourself, who's actually doing the pictures? Is it the family? And that's way more fucked up, really, if people do that. I've known people who are models, and I've known people who are models, so sometimes, their parents will help them out, even if it's like, cosplay, or other things like that, and, in skimpy outfits, whether they be over 18 or under 18, in high school, I've known many girls who were in the cosplay culture, and that would be going on, really. So it is a little, so that does happen where, parents would, help out their children, help out with their outfits, even if they're not wearing a lot really, and they're under 18. That's still a little weird. Or another thing is that there are people who pose nude and then they're close with their parents really and they're over 18, so their parents are like behind the set while they're nude or whatever really. Or in the porn industry, I'm very sure that's happened where there may be some porn stars that may have family members or other people that they know, even parents, just being there to make sure they're all set and fine really, almost like a manager really. So it does happen, that's kind of like a little like twisted, that to see your child or your relative in a very exposed condition really. So those are other controversies, but the main one is that how does she have time to pose images of herself at 12:01 a.m., a minute after her 18th birthday, and how do we know if it's her as a 17-year-old or her as an 18-year-old? And then also too, if she's kind of teasing this and she does nothing, it kind of makes it look like, she's teasing, CP. Unfortunately on YouTube you can't say that, but it looks like she's teasing CP really because she's a 17. And then the other thing that's other questionable about this is, I was born September 27, 1987. I was born at 6:30 p.m. in the Bavaria region of Germany. What would happen if she was actually born on her birthday and let's say it was at 6 a.m. in the morning. Let's say she was born at 12 p.m. in the afternoon. Let's say she was born at 11:59 p.m. On her birthday. So that means she's still, whatever you're seeing is of her being under the age of 18 all the way until the actual minute of her birthday. You're still looking at a 17-year-old. Or there are porn videos online of girls with birthday cake saying like I'm turning 18 at midnight. So it's like you're recording somebody while they're 17, they blow out the candles, you do the fuck scene. Oh, what would happen if there's birth records saying, oh, well, they were actually born at 11:59 on their birthday. Oh, well, you just put CP online, really. So that's another big controversy about this, and then also just teasing, possibly it being underage, really. So, it's definitely not good. And as somebody, as her, since she's in charge of this platform, it's just not good because she doesn't care about the controversy, but she doesn't realize that it's kind of like, people being into that fetish of, okay, you know what, well, she's still 17, but now she's 18, like barely legal type of stuff, really. Or, nobody's going to question her pictures when she's 18 years old, really. So, it's like people who play on that barely legal line. I will not say Lolita, but barely legal, and that's kind of the big controversy. And I think my comments about that is, I think with OnlyFans, the minimum age should be 19 years old. And if there's any type of tease or whatever that somebody is putting content online while they're still 17 or saying it's a minute after my birthday and I'm 18 years old, they should be taken down really because it's teasing that some of it is underage stuff and that shouldn't be allowed. But OnlyFans, they're looking at dollar signs. When porn producers are doing something where they have a 17-year-old on camera with a birthday cake and a party hat blowing out their candles, 18 years old, and then they're filming the fuck scene afterwards, or even if it's a live stream, they're not thinking about ethics. They're thinking about how is that fuck gonna make me money. She's thinking about how is her showing her her titties and her coochie gonna show her money really. And I'm saying that in a blunt way because this is a blunt subject matter. So it's unfortunate they care about dollar signs. That's why I think it should be at least 19 or 20. But I think because you can be drafted into the war. Into a war. I'm at 18 years old, and other things like that. Technically, you're an adult at 18. That's how it's been for a long time in the U.S. They changed to 19 to prevent all that stuff. That's good. But if platforms feel that somebody is putting stuff on there online at 18 and then some of the pictures are before when they were younger, or if you have a girl, no, anybody, any gender, I apologize, any gender do something like that where they're like, okay, here are my high school pictures, and it was my senior year of high school, whatever. If it does feel like somebody's hinting at showing stuff when they're underage, they have to be held accountable for that. But I think that this is just mostly shock jock stuff. And I do want to also talk about the shock value part of it. One thing that I respect Lil Tay for is that she did a post saying that, you know, and I don't remember exactly, but she said something about being a Chinese American and her family shaming her or something like that. And I like what she said about that because in a lot of Asian cultures, that there is a sense that women, their vaginas are just to make a baby, to make a son, really. So I do respect the fact that if she wants to do something with her body and say, "Hey, I'm gonna be open about my sexuality," it doesn't matter that I'm part Asian in this, and in Chinese culture and Japanese culture and a lot of those cultures, women are supposed to be very conservative. Like I think what they say in Japanese culture, like you look at the anime Boruto, where if a woman has a career, wants to get married, it's their job to quit their career, go home, and serve the men folk and take care of the kids. Like, or you watch in Boruto how Hinata went from this warrior to this housewife, or you watch an anime like Nuku Nuku Dash where Nuku Nuku is an android and she's programmed to take off her clothes anytime she wants for the professor, and then she serves the men folk. She makes meals, she gets verbally abused, and she just takes it really. Like she's kind of like the ideal stereotypical Japanese woman really. So when Lil Tay does things like this, really, it's good because it says, hey, any woman of any race or any culture can embrace their sexuality, just like Mia Khalifa, because I believe she's, I forgot what she is, but I know she's from the Middle East. I don't remember exactly, but it was good because it says, hey, Middle Eastern women can be into their sexuality. It's not, the fact that in some cultures, if I remember correctly, that you can get killed for being openly sexual as a woman, that's not right really, in any culture. And then also that hypocrisy too, in some cultures if a man sleeps around, cheats on their wife, it's not a big deal, but if the woman does that, they can get killed or stoned to death or other things. That's just not good. So when you have Lil Tay do things like this, it helps break the stereotypes and helps normalize that everybody can be open about their sexuality, but do it at a legal age and do it in a condition where it's not teasing CP. That's where the controversy is. I will also say that I knew somebody who was from Bangladesh, and they're trans. So they're a woman who dresses up like a man, and they had OnlyFans and they had other things like that. And still, that's a beautiful thing because honestly, people should be open about their sexuality, not like, oh, well, I'm from Asian countries, so therefore, what, my role is that, is just to, my vagina is just to bear children or get married, or if I have a career, I got to give that up because that's what women are not supposed, because women are supposed to like work at home. Some cultures believe in those roles really. So when Lil Tay does this, it breaks those roles, and that's where the world needs to go. Everybody should be allowed to do whatever they want within reasonable parameters, and it's not reasonable parameter to be like, okay, Asian women give up their vaginas when just to have children, or just when they're the housewife and whatever, or when they're sold into sex trafficking. Like, let's be honest with it, that there is an issue in a lot of Asian countries of of the typical gender role. So when Lil Tay does this, it helps break those stereotypes, and it's needed because people should not be killed or destroyed or threatened to be killed for celebrating their sexuality in an appropriate way. Like as I said, Mia Khalifa got a bunch of death threats because of that. There's this porn star named Evelyn Lin, who was called the Shame of China because she did porn. But there's also other porn stars who've gone through that in history, really. Ron Jeremy was, he was Jewish, but, before the controversy, that he got in trouble with his family because obviously, there's stereotypes about Jews being very conservative, so obviously when he did porn, it bothered a lot of people in the Jewish community because they're like, hey, you're depicting us in a bad light, really. But people got to, as I said, people got to celebrate their sexuality in appropriate parameters. Otherwise, we live in a culture where, we go back to killing people who are not heterosexual, or we live in a culture where, women can't have sex unless it's just to make babies, really. and that needs to go away. We all need to be open about our sexuality, but within the right limits. Um, that's important, really. But I also think that another big thing to talk so, and I think like the other talking points about this is, the aftermath. Like, what does this do? Because I like what some people said, that some people, and I've known some former porn stars who I'm friends with who are only on OnlyFans, and some people averagely make like $150 a month, really. So there are a bunch of people in high school that are like, hey, you know what? And I'm speaking hypothetically. I'm very sure, I assume that there's some people in high school that are like, oh, well, when I'm 18, I'm going to do an OnlyFans. It's going to help me through college. And some people, some people have that, but then some people don't make any money. And I think they said the average is around like $150 a month or whatever, really. So going on to OnlyFans does not lead you to gold, really. And then the other issue is that there are, just like with a lot of porn stars, you're popular for a while and then your popularity goes away. So where's Lil Tay gonna be when she's 30? Where she's gonna be when she's 40? She's like a celebrity, really. What's gonna happen when people are not attracted to her looks or whatever, and she has an expensive lifestyle? What would happen when she's broke and she's looking for a job, really? And this could happen to her, where she could be one of those celebrities that commits suicide because you don't have the lifestyle, you don't have everything like that, and now you're in debt and whatever. And I'm saying that to be honest. This could lead to her committing suicide. I don't want that to happen. I wish that on nobody. I know what depression and those thoughts are like. I've overcame that, but there's such a thing as having everything, having all the attention, and then not having that, or people saying, "Oh, you're too old," or "Oh, well, you're just the same old chick," whatever, really, and then that could lead to depression and other things. I don't want that. I don't want that for her. I don't want that for anybody. I would sell my soul to the devil to remove certain things from the world. People with depression, suicidal thoughts. Like, I would remove depression itself from everybody. I would remove suicidal thoughts from everybody if I had that power. I would remove like war and violence and sexual assault and every act of violence. If I could sell my soul to the devil for one reason, so the world lives without any form of violence or self-violence or violence on others, I would. If I could do that, and I'm trying to figure that out on my own, I would do that. I would do that. Sell my soul for the devil for that purpose. But with that said, really, it can lead to that. Really, it also can lead to other models or other women doing that. Or like, I forgot her name was. I forgot her name. I think it's like or Emily Rose or Alina Rose or whatever that girl is. Amelia Rose. She could be doing this because she's also somebody. There are other models on. There are other controversial child models online, or shock content creators like Amelia Rose destroying stuff. This could lead to them doing that. And I also I used to do filmmaking and I used to do directing. So when you know actors, you know actors of all ages, and there are actors of all ages, on Instagram. Some of them in swimsuits. Sometimes their parents help them change clothes or whatever, really. So it's kind of like that thing too of it can inspire any of those people to say, hey, we'll make it more sexy. Or, whoa, I'm underage, I'm in high school, let's make it more sexy, and then I'm going to do what she did. We're gonna sexualize ourselves, and then, oh, we're close to 18, let's just do this. There could be a lot of just copycats of that stuff, and that's not good, really. Because again, what people don't realize is that whenever you sexualize yourself, especially if you're a child, there is somebody being drawn to you. Like, look at the old Shirley Temple films where there's this film of her singing, and a bunch of men are picking her up, putting their hands on her, and they're all like, as she's tuning. We know as adults we get that. Or I was watching this clip of Elvis Presley, and he's in a film called Harem Scarum, and he's singing a song to a girl, and he's saying come here, little girl, do that dance for me. Come here, little girl, you're cute as can be. Come here, I'll make you a movie star. That's all sexual innuendos. And this girl's dancing, doing a belly dance and shaking her hips, really. And she's under 8 years old or whatever. But she's either 8 or 9 years old. But the point of it is that this can cause a situation where it can inspire other children who are underage to kind of more sexualize themselves, really. And then you're going to have Herbert the pervert, Pete Diddy, R. Kelly, and all those other people like just finding that or spank banking to it. So you have to be really mindful of the depiction of your children, but also you have to make them all aware of all the consequences. Because there are also times too when like people are dressing sexy in high school, they're putting pictures online, and then they have fan bases and they have people talk to them, and then they say, hey, let's meet up, and then they get raped and killed by someone. Like that could be a path to her really. So like this whole entire teasing, am I posting photos at 17 or am I posting photos as 18? All this stuff really. The fact that she has over $1 million and she has a lot of subscribers really now, and a lot of people just wanted to see those 12:01 a.m. pictures is disturbing. But it also shows how there are loopholes around CP content and everything like that really. So there are a lot of talking points to this. But ultimately, I just hope that Lil Tay understands that, this can lead to other people imitating that and people getting hurt. This can also lead to a situation where she sexualizes, she tries to take things way too far, like the Island Boys making out with each other. I think there's a video of them saying that they sucked, showing them doing incest and whatever, really. But this can kind of lead to more and more and more intense stuff. What's she gonna do? Is she gonna what's she gonna do next? Is she gonna go down to jail, bail out Ron Jeremy, and then reenact some of his stuff really? Like where does the limit end? Where does it end really? So you just have to. She really has to think about that, because again, there's always people inspired by her. There's always going to be women, young girls inspired by her, and they may follow her example really. And that's with anybody. We're all like a role model to somebody. So we have to think about those things. And I also will say a final thing is that this is not an old issue, and this is disturbing stuff. But like I've said, throughout history, there's been sexualization of children. Like obviously Lolita was a Stanley Kubrick film. There was I think it's called Ava Ionesco or Irina Ionesco. Like one's the photographer, one's the mother photographer, one's the model. She was in a film called Mount Adolescenza, and the mother would photograph her nude underage really, and people would say things like, oh, that's just CP and whatever. And then there's some people that say, oh, that's beautiful, or you already see like naked cupids and whatever, like cupids. There are some paintings of cupids in the form of naked children with wings and whatever. So, and then there's also Brooke Shields, who posed in Playboy. She was in a film called Pretty Baby, where she was like 11 years old with nothing on really. And then there's also Dana Plato, who I believe posed for Playboy in lingerie, and so did Brooke Shields. And I believe that Brooke Shields was also nude in Playboy while she's underage really. So there's always been these controversies, coming around with in every lifetime and every generation really, of depiction of children. You look at any Japanese anime, like a lot of Japanese anime has anime characters that are under 18 years old really. Like you have Hinata skinny dipping and dancing in silhouette in one of the episodes of Naruto, and I don't believe she's over 15 years old really. And I believe that was on Cartoon Network really. You have Goku, walking around naked as a little kid, really, So these things always have to be talked about. They're good discussion points, but ultimately, any type of sexualization of a child is dangerous. You're playing with fire here, because then it's like, okay, where can people push the boundary next? Oh, well, if you have anybody acting sexy, really, at a young age, what happens when a pervert takes them in the middle of the night, rapes them, and kills them in the woods? Oh, what happens when they have other girls doing that? It's something to always think about. Like when I was in high school, the last thing I'll talk about was I think it was Stupid Spoiled Whore. I think it was that was I forgot Paris Hilton and Christina Aguilera and other. So I know when I lived in Guilford, Connecticut, there were girls too that would always their butts would be showing. Short skirts or micro skirts, or just tops with their tits showing. And And I remember like one time, like that was kind of like my culture. That was kind of like what I grew up around in high school. And then I also remember like one time my dad drove me home from like from visiting my grandmother, and I remember how there were like three or four girls, in high school, all dressed up, looking like hookers, really, with like the short skirts by themselves, walking all the way home. Really, I remember my dad saying something like, if I had a daughter, that wouldn't, like if you were my daughter, Byron, you wouldn't be doing that. And I thought to myself, like, my dad's very uptight, like Hank Hill. Like I bet if I was a woman, he would. If I was like a daughter, if I was his daughter, if I was born a woman and I was his little girl and his daughter, he'd probably have me dress up like I was part of the Salem witch trial with all the black and like, you kiss a girl, man, that's the same thing as hardcore porn, really. My dad's that type of uptight, really. But as you get older, you kind of realize, why you have your children cover up, and that has to be with all children, not just with girls. But because the stereotype is that only women get raped. The stereotype is only women get sexually harassed. The stereotype is that only women get sexually assaulted as underage. Really, that's all genders and that's all people. So I can understand why there's more talks of people like trying to say, oh well, Lil Tay needs to cover up and things like that. But it comes down to what I've said before, and I'll say it again: is that it's always important to think about the depiction of children and what happens when they decide to sexualize themselves, and also try to advertise something like Lil Tay's doing, like saying, "Oh, my first pictures are at 12:01 a.m." when 2 minutes ago she was 17 years old. And like I said before, what would happen if she was born at 12:59 p.m. on her birthday? Everything she posts during that first day of her OnlyFans at 18 years old is her when she's 17 until you have the actual time that she came out of her mom's vagina. So it's definitely very controversial. Make wise choices with your bodies. Being sex positive and sexualizing yourself is important, but be responsible with it. The same with free speech. It's important, but be responsible with it. And don't make yourself vulnerable, and be the right type of role model, because this could lead to people imitating her and getting hurt, and that's not what we want.